his sons, you will not defeat the famine looking at each other.
No one could have predicted the moment that would shake an empire of faith. In early 2024, news broke that Bishop T.D. Jakes, one of the most recognized spiritual voices in the world, had suffered a serious health emergency. For millions who had watched him for decades, the news felt unreal. How could the same man who had built a ministry of power and endurance, who preached about rising above storms, now find himself in one? But life has a way of humbling even the strongest. For Bishop Jakes, this was not just another chapter. It was a reckoning. What began as exhaustion and quiet warnings from his body soon became a wake-up call that forced him to confront everything he had ignored for years: stress, overwork, and the dangerous belief that strength means silence. A private battle becomes public. The first report said it was a medical emergency. What they didn't show were the weeks leading up to it. The long flights, the endless preaching schedule, the sleepless nights filled with calls, meetings, and ministry demands. Jakes had been running at full speed for decades. To his congregation and viewers around the world, he was a mountain of energy, a man who could carry both a church and a global following. But behind that strength was a body asking for rest. Doctors later shared that his condition had developed slowly over time, the result of stress and years of pushing himself beyond normal limits. It was a moment that changed everything. When he finally opened his eyes in the hospital, the man who had spent his life saving others was being forced to save himself. The wake-up call for Jakes, the health scare, was more than physical. It was spiritual. He realized that even faith leaders can forget to take care of the vessel that carries the vision. He had spent years giving to others, preaching about healing, purpose, and grace, yet had neglected his own. That realization hit harder than any diagnosis. In interviews later, he admitted he had ignored small warning signs for years: fatigue, stress, headaches, the little things we all brush off. But this time, his body refused to be silent. "It was like God tapping me on the shoulder," he said later, and saying, "You're doing too much, son. Slow down before it's too late." The transformation begins. When he returned home, the world noticed something different. Gone was the large, commanding figure who once filled stadiums with presence alone. In his place was a man leaner, quieter, and more reflective. His physical transformation startled people. Some called it inspiring, others whispered their doubts. Online forums buzzed with theories. Had something else happened behind the scenes? Was he hiding another condition? But Jakes didn't let the noise distract him. He explained that his transformation was intentional, a choice rooted in survival, not vanity. He had changed his diet completely, shifting from comfort foods to cleaner, heart-healthy meals. He began to move more, walk more, breathe more. It wasn't about quick results. It was about building a rhythm that allowed him to live, not just lead. A different kind of strength. As his body changed, so did his voice, not in tone, but in truth. When he stood behind the pulpit again, there was something new in the air. The same man who once thundered about destiny and breakthrough now spoke with softness, almost a tremor of honesty. He talked about fear, about denial, about the temptation to look strong while breaking inside. For the first time, his sermons weren't just about faith conquering adversity. They were about learning to rest in vulnerability. Strength, he told his congregation, is not pretending you're okay. It's having the courage to admit you're not. Those words hit deeper than any sermon he had preached before, because they came from a man who had lived every syllable. The family behind the faith behind the headlines was a family that never left his side. His wife, Sarita, and their children became his pillars during recovery. They made sure he rested, ate right, and took each new day with patience. Friends close to the family said this season drew them closer than ever before. It reminded them all that the man the world called Bishop was also a husband, a father, and a grandfather. Someone who needed love as much as he gave it. His family, especially his children, encouraged him to slow down, to enjoy life, to laugh again. That laughter, soft and hesitant at first, became part of his healing. Redefining the pulpit. When Bishop Jakes eventually returned to preaching full-time, his messages carried a new kind of power. Gone was the fiery performer who moved audiences through sheer energy. In his place stood a man who spoke from the quiet authority of someone who had been through the valley and come back changed. He began emphasizing rest, mental health, and balance. His ministry, The Potter's House, started new wellness programs and partnerships focused on self-care and longevity. He urged pastors not to confuse calling with exhaustion, to stop sacrificing health for ministry. For a generation raised to believe that grinding was the only path to success, his message was radical. Faith in the face of fear. During his sermons and interviews, Jakes began opening up about fear, something he had never discussed publicly before. He admitted he had been afraid of slowing down, afraid of being forgotten, afraid of showing weakness. "You think if you stop moving, everything will fall apart," he said. But sometimes stopping is the only way to keep living. That confession changed the way people saw him. No longer was he just the preacher with the booming voice and best-selling books. He was a man standing on the same fragile ground as everyone else, and that honesty made him more relatable than ever. The ripple effect. His story became a lifeline for others. Across churches, communities, and online spaces, people began sharing how his near-death experience inspired them to take their health seriously. Men who had ignored doctor's visits booked appointments. Women balancing family, work, and ministry took breaks without guilt. The message was spreading far beyond the pulpit. If someone as powerful as Bishop Jakes could learn to rest, so could they. A new chapter of ministry. In the months that followed, Bishop Jakes shifted focus from building larger platforms to building deeper connections. He prioritized mentorship, wellness, and authenticity. His conferences began to emphasize emotional healing alongside spiritual growth. The sermons that once roared now felt like conversations, intimate, reflective, and raw. In them, he spoke about letting go of pride, choosing joy, and redefining what success really means. "It's not about being seen," he said during one event. "It's about being whole." Those words became the heartbeat of his new season. Lessons in grace. Through all the noise, one truth remained clear. T.D. Jakes had been given a second chance, and he wasn't wasting it. He began urging others to live more mindfully, to find balance, and to listen when their bodies whisper before they scream. His message reached beyond faith into something universal: the need for self-compassion. What made his story resonate was not perfection, but transformation. He wasn't preaching from triumph anymore. He was preaching from truth. The power of transparency. Jakes' willingness to share his fears, his mistakes, and his journey toward recovery gave permission to others to do the same. He often reminded audiences that leadership is not about pretending to be invincible, but about showing courage in imperfection. This openness turned his personal crisis into a collective moment of healing. It reminded people that faith is not the absence of struggle. It's the decision to keep believing through it. The legacy of renewal. As time passed, the controversy faded, but the impact remained. Bishop Jakes' transformation, physical, emotional, and spiritual, became a symbol of resilience. His story wasn't about weight loss or public image. It was about humility and rebirth. He had walked through the fire and emerged refined, not ruined. And as he looked toward the future, he seemed more at peace than ever. Life, he told his congregation, isn't about how loud you shout. It's about how honestly you live. Conclusion. A life rewritten. In the end, the man who once carried the weight of an empire learned to carry only what mattered: faith, family, and purpose. The heart attack that nearly ended his life became the heartbeat of a new mission: to teach the world that even giants need rest, even leaders need healing, and even the strongest among us must learn to pause. Bishop T.D. Jakes' story isn't about tragedy. It's about transformation. It's about a man who faced his limits, embraced vulnerability, and discovered that true strength begins the moment we stop pretending to have it all together. And perhaps that's the greatest sermon he'll ever preach.